Shabbat Shalom. So I know that it is almost the holiday of Shavuot, but I want you to rewind your mind back a little bit to right before Pesach. But there's one little change. You also have to go back about 2,000 years. Meaning that rather than looking at your large modern house, and trust me, whatever house or apartment you live in, it is large by ancient standards, you are instead looking at your one-room building that you call home. And you have just finished cleaning it for Pesach. Doesn't take so much time. After all, it's only one room, has a dirt floor. It is not too much of an ordeal. And as you step out of the house, hands on the hips, satisfied with how great you have done, suddenly, along the dirt path beside you, a mouse runs by. And the mouse is carrying a piece of bread in its mouth. And it shoots into your house. I just finished cleaning there. Who knows where that mouse is going? Who knows where it is dropping off that crumb? But then, much to your happiness, a weasel comes out of your house. You're not happy there's a weasel in there, but at least it's leaving. And as it is leaving, it is holding a mouse in its mouth. And in the mouth of the mouse is a piece of bread. Ah, such a sense of relief. The weasel has now removed the mouse and the bread from my house. Everything is good again. Except, how do you know it's the same mouse? How do you know it's the same piece of bread? How do you know that it didn't drop off that piece of bread that it was carrying in the first place, and then take out the piece of bread that you have missed in your cleaning, and now you have a false sense of security that your house is kosher for Passover? Surely you would need to do an examination of your house, again, top to bottom, such as it is, to make sure. Surely this weasel gives you no sense of relief. Or perhaps it does. Or perhaps it doesn't. This is one of the famous examples from the Talmud of a teku moment, of a, we're not 100% sure. Now, in this moment, we let the topic stand because, really, what is the likelihood that this is going to happen? Has anybody ever in the history of the world been standing outside their house and seen a mouse run through with a piece of bread? What are the odds that that would even occur, let alone that you would witness it? And then if it did happen, what are the odds there would be a weasel coming out shortly thereafter? So why does our tradition waste time discussing this topic? Why does it waste time discussing so many bizarre topics, the odds of which are near zero, or indeed, until very recently in some cases, are simply impossible? Because the flexibility in Judaism comes from our willingness to examine and discuss the impossible, to penetrate into what might be the halacha in the most extreme cases, allows us not only to know what is the law in the normal world, but to be ready, to be on our toes when the world throws you a curveball. Judaism is not afraid of novelty, because we have already imagined the most novel situations imaginable. For example, another case of weasels entering into the halachic discourse, they do tend to get around. There was a question about a firstborn animal. If an animal is to be considered the firstborn of a particular mother, and thus subject to all the halacha that goes with being a firstborn, it has to be the one that opens the womb. It has to be the actual birth that is causing the womb to be opened for the first time. Which means an animal born by C-section is not considered to be an animal that is a firstborn. This applies, by the way, for humans as well, for pidyon hatem purposes. But, say our rabbis, what if there's a weasel? What if the weasel enters the womb, and it swallows the fetus, and then exits the womb, and then it is born from this weasel? Does that mean that It opened the womb or didn't open the womb. Certainly it journeyed through the birth canal, but it journeyed wrapped inside of a weasel. And therefore, does it count or does it not count as that which opened the womb? By the way, the answer is it does not count as opening the womb in that circumstance. I'm sure you are all greatly relieved to now know that particular piece of halacha, in case it ever comes up. Now, like I said, until about, 50 years ago, this was one of the things people would point to as being the stupidity of the Talmud. How could we have wasted not only the original discussion, but thousands of years continuing the discussion of this? Or if two animals have their wombs back to back and the fetus travels between one to the other without entering the world, why were we doing this? Why were we splitting hairs in our legalism? Well, it turns out this is exactly what happens with surrogacy. Now that we have IVF treatments, now that we are able to take the genetic material from a man and a woman and to create a new potential fetus and to implant it in a new womb, the question quickly came up, well, wait, who's the actual mother? Is it the woman who donated the genetic material, or is it the woman whose womb the child is now in, and from which the child will exit? And this is not something that is merely of halakhic interest. This has serious implications. As you all know in Jewish law, the person who births the child determines the child's identity vis-a-vis their religion. So if the genetic material is taken from a non-Jewish woman and implanted within a Jewish woman, is the child considered Jewish or not Jewish? And vice versa. If genetic material is taken from a Jewish woman, but is carried to term in a non-Jewish woman who then births the child, is the child considered Jewish or not Jewish? You have to go back to the weasel. Right? It wasn't just a fairy tale of animals. And Jewish law says, whoever gives birth, that is the identity of the child. Genetic material from a Jewish mother but implanted in a non-Jewish womb, the child is not Jewish at birth. If the child is going to be part of the Jewish family, you take the child to a mikvah as a baby, and the child is now Jewish. But the mikvah step is important. And vice versa. If genetic material is donated by a non-Jewish donor, but it is there within the womb of a Jewish mother and she gives birth to it, the child is Jewish. For Judaism is not transmitted genetically. It is about the chain of life and the chain of how there is the interaction between birth and the new step of living is where we find the linkage. Judaism has spent thousands of years examining these different permutations. And often within our texts, great swaths, remembering back to some of my wonderful days in rabbinic school, are taken up with what seem to be pointless discussions of meaningless, trivial issues, and some impossible circumstances. Meat falling from heaven, is it kosher or not? A man falling from a roof, impregnating a woman below. Does this count as a willful impregnation? Very important for Levirate marriage. Issues of a person born with two heads. Do they wear two tefillin or not? It may seem like these are stupid questions, but in examining these stupid issues, we uncover the essence of what it is to be Jewish and to follow God's laws in all the realms of this life. And it also means that with all of our discussions of things that are impossible, bizarre, or at the very least improbable, when this particular new set of circumstances began, lo and behold, we've talked about things like this. What happens if there's a person who is listening to the window to a service and they can hear, can they say amen to what is happening in the service? And if the people in the service can know that there's a person listening outside, can they be counted in the meeting? I mean, come on. When are you ever going to have somebody on another roof listening through a window to a shul, and someone in the shul knowing there's a guy in there. When is that ever going to happen? Thank you, Cameron. It's going to happen now. It's going to happen now. And certainly our ancestors did not anticipate that there would be such a thing as live streaming. But they anticipated that we would need to understand to the root, down to the base and foundation, all the possible permutations of how joining together would work. They needed to know which way the weasel went in order to find out what it actually meant to be a minyan, to be a community, to understand how to apply Jewish law in the normal and in the abnormal circumstances. And by preparing us for that for thousands of years, whatever the situation has been, whether it has been any of the catastrophes or any of the celebrations of our people, we have always been ready. We have always been prepared to know how to handle this. Yes, there's still debate and discussion, but the debate and discussion is not starting with, I have no idea. It is starting with, let me tell you about a weasel. Shabbat Shalom.